Every system has an architecture. Most people see the facade. This is what's underneath. May 2025, for 34 years, one country quietly funded the global financial system. In May, that ended. Nobody told you, nobody put it on the front page. This wasn't a story about Japan, this was the story about why your mortgage rate stayed low, why American debt never broke, why Europe could borrow at zero. Tokyo wasn't the patient, Tokyo was the IV drip, and the drip is being pulled silently without a single press release. By the time it makes the news, the damage will already be priced in. Money, power, collapse. Here's what we are going to do in the next 15 minutes. I'm going to walk you through the actual machinery of how Japan funded the world for 3.5 decades. I'm going to show you the day in August 2024 when a small piece of that machinery broke and almost took the global market with it. I am going to show you the silent mechanism that is unwinding the rest of it right now. In 8 insurance companies in Tokyo without a single headline. And by minute 14, you will see why the Bank of Japan meeting on April 27th and 28th matters more than the next Federal Reserve decision. Not because of what they will do, because of what they cannot stop. The headlines describe the weather. We map the climate. Let's start with the architecture. For the last 23 years until 2022, Japanese investors bought $100 billion of foreign bonds every single year on average, without exception. For 2 decades, think about that number. $100 billion per year leaving Tokyo, flowing into U.S. Treasuries, German Bunds, French and Australian sovereign debt, a river of capital with no source country and no destination headline. The buyers were not the government, the buyers were not retail investors, the buyers were Japanese life insurance companies, agricultural banks like Norinchukin, and pension funds, quiet institutional buyers with 70-year horizons. They bought because their domestic alternative paid them nothing. The Bank of Japan held the 10-year JGB yield near zero for 2 decades. So insurers needed to fund pension liabilities denominated in yen, and the only way to do that was to buy yield abroad and bring it home. Here's the term you need to understand. It is called a hedge ratio. Imagine an insurer in Osaka buys a US Treasury bond paying 4%. The bond pays in dollars. The insurer pays Japanese pensions in yen. So between the day she buys the bond and the day she sells it, the dollar can fall against the yen and wipe out her 4% yield. The hedge ratio is the seatbelt. It is the percentage of that dollar exposure she protects with a currency swap. 60% hedge ratio means she protected 60 cents of every dollar against currency moves. 40% means she only protected 40. For most of the last 2 decades, Japanese insurers ran their hedge ratio around 60%. Conservative, boring. Predictable, the river kept flowing. Japanese private investors ended up holding roughly 18% of all foreign-owned U.S. Treasuries, the largest single foreign creditor of American debt, larger than China, larger than the United Kingdom, larger than the Saudis, and almost no one in the United States knew their name. This architecture worked for 23 years. Until one Monday in August 2024, when $200 billion vanished from one specific trade in 36 hours. Most of you remember the headline. Almost none of you were told what it actually was. August 5th, 2024, a Monday. The Bank of Japan had raised rates by 1/4 point the previous week. Small move. Boring number, but the carry trade, the practice of borrowing yen at 0 and lending it abroad at 4, suddenly became more expensive to maintain. And when something becomes expensive to maintain, the leveraged players exit first. $200 billion in carry trades unwound in 36 hours. The Nikkei dropped 12.4% in a single session, the worst single day for the Japanese index since the crash of 1987. The VIX, the index of fear in U.S. equity markets, broke 60. We had not seen 60 since the COVID panic of 2020. The Bank for International Settlements wrote a 14-page internal speech that month, titled How Big the Yen Carry Trade Really Is. Classification restricted, no marking. The central bank for central banks did not want this analysis circulating publicly. We mapped the climate. Markets recovered within a week. The headline cycle moved on, but the architecture had cracked. And the people who built the architecture, the insurers in Tokyo, started doing something they had never done before. They stopped reinvesting. Here's the part that does not make the news. There is a mechanism happening right now in 8 insurance companies in Tokyo that is unwinding the trade silently. No fire sales, No alerts. Just a number on a spreadsheet that drops by 2% every quarter, the hedge ratio, the seatbelt, the protection insurers wear when they buy foreign bonds from 2023 to today. Japanese life insurers have reduced that hedge ratio from 60% to 40%. In 2 years, they are not selling a single existing bond. They are simply letting bonds mature and then choosing not to roll them over or rolling them over with less currency protection, which is the same thing as planning to bring less money home. The Council on Foreign Relations tracked the inversion in the flow data in 2022. For the first time in 23 years, Japanese investors became net sellers of foreign bonds. $200 billion in net sales. The buyer of last resort had become the seller of first resort, quietly spread across thousands of individual maturity decisions in Osaka and Tokyo and Nagoya. No press release. No congressional hearing, just absence. Absence is the most powerful financial movement of this decade, and almost no one is reporting it, because there is no event to film, there's no podium, there is no quote. There's only the bond that did not get bought. Everything I've shown you so far is documented, sourced, boring, almost. But there is one inversion in this story that once you see it, you cannot unsee. And it explains why the IMF wrote a working paper in December 2025 with a phrase no central bank wanted spoken out loud. Money, power, collapse. Here it is, and this is where the story breaks. You have been told for 30 years that Japan got sick, lost decades, aging demographics, deflation trap. Japanification became a verb in financial journalism, a warning of what happens to economies that fail. Europe is becoming Japan. America might become Japan. The patient on the bed slowly fading, a cautionary tale. The truth is the opposite. Japan was the medicine, and the world was the patient for 34 years. The river of capital flowing out of Tokyo kept yields low everywhere it landed. American mortgage rates that stayed cheap from 2000 to 2022 were not cheap because of Federal Reserve policy alone. They were cheap because Japanese insurers were buying U.S. Treasuries at rates Americans themselves would not accept. German Bunds traded at negative yields for years because Norinchukin was buying them anyway. The European Central Bank could keep rates at zero because there was always a Tokyo bid waiting on the other side of every auction. Japanification was not a Japanese disease. Japanification was the export. The system is not broken. It is working exactly as designed for those who designed it. The world ran on Japan's silence. The world ran on Japan's silence. The silence is ending. Now, I can already hear the objection. Some of you are thinking, but the government pension investment fund holds $1.87 trillion. Its benchmark allocates 25% to foreign bonds. If Japan is leaving, why isn't GPIF selling? It's the largest pension fund in the world. They publish their holdings. We can check fair question, wrong vector. GPIF is not the carry trade vector. It never was. GPIF is a pension fund with a mandate. Buy and hold, rebalance quarterly. They report their allocations on a calendar. They are not the silent machinery. The actual machinery was the life insurers and Norinchukin. $250 billion core position per BIS Bulletin number 90, and insurers don't sell. They don't have to. They just stop reinvesting when bonds mature. Hedge ratio drops from 60 to 40% in 2 years. No headline, no press release, just absence. The most powerful financial movement of this decade is something that's not happening. GPIF was the decoy. The real flow was always somewhere else. And here's the moment when even the last myth holding the architecture together died. February 2026, the Iran conflict begins. For the first time since 2008, the yen failed to rally during a global risk-off event. USD JPY broke 159 and stayed there. The currency that had been the world's safe haven for 2 decades did not catch a bid when the world needed a safe haven. BCA Research, February 11, 2026, ticking time bomb. The yen had stopped functioning as the asset of last resort, which means the carry trade had nothing left holding it together, no yield support, no safe haven floor, just gravity. We don't predict collapse, we trace the fractures already there. So let's bring this to the present. Let's put the numbers on the table. The Bank of Japan meets April 27th through 28th. Polymarket gives a 97% probability of no rate hike. 80% of 51 economists in the Reuters survey confirmed the same. They will hold because they cannot afford not to. The June meeting carries a 60% probability of a hike to 1%. That is the fork in the road. Why does the BOJ matter more than the Fed right now? Because the Bank of Japan owns 52% of all outstanding Japanese government bonds. 52%. The previous record was 53.34% in March 2023. The central bank owns the bond market. They cannot meaningfully sell into a market they are. They cannot meaningfully raise rates without bankrupting their own balance sheet on coupon costs. The 10-year JGB yield touched 2.49% on April 13, 2026, the highest since 1997. 29 years. The market is pricing the unwind whether the BOJ acts or not, and here's the inversion that explains everything else. April 16, 2026, the Nikkei hit a new all-time intraday high, 59,569, while births collapsed to 705,809 in 2025, the 10th consecutive record low 15 years earlier than the 2023 projection. The equity market is making history while the demographic base is collapsing 15 years ahead of schedule. This is not paradox. This is the architecture revealing itself. The Nikkei is not pricing Japanese growth. It is pricing the repatriation of Japanese capital. Money that spent 30 years funding foreign treasuries is coming home and bidding up Tokyo equities. The strength of the Nikkei is the visible signal of the invisible withdrawal. Even the alternative architecture being built around the dollar, the one I documented in the previous chapter, depends on yen liquidity for half of intra-Asia trade routes. Tokyo isn't just funding America. Tokyo funds the bypass from America. There is no version of the global financial system that does not, somewhere in the plumbing, depend on Japanese capital remaining patient and silent. That patience is over. We cite, we source, we show the work. The flow data is in the CFR blog. The hedge ratio mechanics are in BIS Bulletin 90. The carry trade speech is in the BIS archive. The net IIP figures are in the Ministry of Finance release. The polymarket probabilities are public. The Nikkei intraday records are on the exchange. None of this is hidden. All of it has been there. We are simply pointing at it and naming what it is. The world ran on Japan's silence. The silence is ending. Money, power, collapse. The system keeps moving, so do we. Until next time, question the architecture.